we are going to discuss the system makers in details, the system maintainers, as well as the system grinders. As I had introduced last time, our aim is to create a nexus between who influences society and who misses into this influence game. In our organization, we want to create a people that are destined to make use of this knowledge and to expand our brains and our minds into thinking different from what those that went before us thought. We will never give again to the ideals of failure and those ideals that made us to be who we are. In Africa and in Zambia in particular, we want to create a mentality that enables us as a team as well as a movement to move from those that simply want to ask to be those that want to give, to move from those that want to beg to those that want to create. We want to have a mentality and the resources to move beyond simply existing to start living. Now, last time I introduced that the system is made up of 3 quadrants. The first quadrant are the elevated system makers, and I start with that. The levels of the quadrants, as we saw, you are born into one of these quadrants, without exception. I was born in one of these quadrants. You are born in one of these quadrants. I'll give you a personal example. When I was born, probably, I was born in the maintenance quadrant. My father had a job, and we lived by simply waiting for the pay to pay every month. And after my father died, I relocated or fell back into the grinders quadrant. I found myself in a situation in which I was longing for food, begging to exist, and sometimes even begging to die. It was a very crushing situation. If you read my book, Zambia Struggles of My People, the first version, I recount my struggles in the Zambian shanty compounds. It wasn't a life that I would love or would have loved my children to experience. I speak of the real situations I found in under the Second Republic, under the presidency of Kenneth Kaunda. Whilst most of the people experienced Zambia in different ways, my experience was that of the third quadrant. It was struggle at its best. But I decided that I would move heaven and earth to move myself from the first to the second, even to the third quadrants. And that's where I started that ambitious program that led me even relocating physically to Canada. So most of you must ask, is Canada my destination? No, Canada is not my destination. Canada is a mutual destination that I've married with the destination of Zambia. So my living here has been a benefit, but also at the same time a lesson in learning. Shortly, probably not very far away, that's why we are starting these movements, so that I could share my experiences and probably benefit Zambia at the largest ebb consistently. My experiences were one of personal endeavors. I had no sponsors, no helpers, no motivators, no innovators, no one who was able to give me the benefit of a doubt. So I rose through the ranks by myself, with the help of God most of the time, and made myself. And it has always been now my goal that none who is associated with me should go through what I went through. That's why most of you benefited from my writings and are going to benefit from them. Is the fact that I don't want anybody who was in the situation I was in to be like me. You know, in life, you can experience life vicariously. You don't need to go through everything somebody went through to suffer and become. We have had certain icons in Africa like Nelson Mandela. We don't want any African country to go through what Nelson Mandela went through to become independent, or to secure for his people a nation that they could call their own. We do not need to go through what the first freedom fighters went through in order for us to create a Zambia that is developed. We do not need to experience all the shackles of poverty for us then to appreciate prosperity. A few that have gone before us and done that are enough. That is why I bank on the fact that the future of our continent, Africa and Zambia in particular, must not repeat the mistakes of the historic proportions that those who went before us made. This little book, The System, How Society Confines and Defines Us, is one of the attempts to give everyone that is part of our institution and our movement, and very soon to be registered organization, a move ahead in terms of what they experience and what they shouldn't experience. I am here for everyone that desires to change the future. We cannot let the future become our habitat. We must change it, and it must respond to our change. So today I embark on 3 quadrants, and I hope to finish them within 30 minutes. The first one is the system makers. Now I'll give you a quotation that I formulated years ago, and it reads, and I quote, "Influencers are ordinarily born, but choose to be to do extraordinary things, fearlessly and dedicatively." I'm going to repeat that. It's my quote. Born in a rich family, they are born in a political family, they are born in a family that had already a name in the nation. For those who are born in the system of the system makers, things are relatively easier for them because probably their father or grandfather has already established a name, so they don't struggle like the rest. If they apply for a job, their last name speaks for them. Their money and bank account speaks for them. And their station in life speaks for them. That's why those who are in the first quadrant are always making things. They are always moving things. Now, it is possible to move from one quadrant to the next. It is possible that some, like myself, a good example, I could have been born in the maintenance quadrant, but I have decided, and I decided many years ago, to move into the makers quadrant. There are some of you are listening to me that have been born into the grinders quadrant or the maintenance quadrant and might want to move into the makers quadrant. And this lesson today is for you. What are the characteristics of the system makers? The system makers are characterized by 3 traits, and these traits define who they are. The system makers are few. They are not the largest in society. If you've been following information and as well as reporting from the United States of America, it will shock you that the number in the United States for the system makers has moved from 5% to 1%. In other words, in the United States of America, those who make things happen only constitute 1% of the population. Those are the one who owns probably 90% of the resources of the United States. That is not strange. If you come to countries like Zambia, for example, we have 20% system makers. They own 80% of the natural reserves and resources in the country. That's why sometimes it's very difficult for people to move from one quadrant to the next. It's because those who own the means of production and those who enjoy the best of life in the country are a minute percent who take advantage of the rest and maintain their station in life. Now, these characteristics I'm going to enumerate could change your perspective about life. First of all, daring. The first characteristic of those in the maker's quadrant is that they are daring. They are bold. In other words, they are not afraid to fail. They start new things. That's why they create avenues for technology, avenues for innovation. They bring out new ideas that have not been tested. They are courageous, they are audacious, and they are enterprising. Now, it is not a mistake that they do have those qualities, because most of the time they have the resources to make those qualities enhanced. A person from a poor family in Africa, somewhere in Shangombo village, might have an idea of how to transform the land and the forest into a very vibrant industrial place. But then they find themselves with a quandary of asking, where do I get the resources, the money, the support to do this? So in the end, they resign themselves to believing that nothing can happen, and they go to their graves with ideas that will have changed their landscape. That's why somebody said, the richest place on earth is the grave, because many people with great potential are lying there and they will never do it again. We shouldn't let our future look like that. The rich, on the other hand, they can change anything. They have the money. They can pay anybody. They can even buy ideas from those who dream them. And they can even own those ideas as their own. And that's why it doesn't pay for you to remain in the grinders or the maintenance quadrants. It pays for all of us to strive to reach the makers, because that's where things happen. From the word itself, they make things happen. One of the characteristics that becomes part of the makers is the characteristic that they are not afraid to fail. They don't do things because they can fail. I'll give you good examples. All the giants we have seen in the recent past, and probably we'll be very shocked that we all think about them in terms of the United States, because they are influencing us at the moment. Look at Steve Jobs, who was one of the founders of Apple. The devices which we are using, I'm using my iPhone right now to communicate to most of you. Think about Bill Gates, Microsoft. Think about even Donald Trump, who failed to get a second term in the United States, but is holding on right there. Think of all these people. What will shock you is that they tried several times. They failed. They went bankrupt. But because they had the support, they belonged in the makers, they were able to change their circumstances into pluses and invented things and became rich. They are not different from one of the boys from Kapisha compound in Chingola, for example, where I grew up in my primary days, who would have dreamt of the same, but would have failed to actualize them because they didn't have resources. They would have thought exactly the thoughts that Steve Jobs thought, Bill Gates thought, or even Mark Zuckerberg thought. But they wouldn't have the resources to transform or to translate their ideas into practicality. So some of them are deviant, some of them have ceased to exist, some of them became drunkards or destroyed their lives because they were hopeless. They were hopeless because of the quadrant in which they were located, in which they found themselves. If they had the same resource like everybody else, they would have managed them to exponential greatness. That is why quadrants matter. The second thing that is a characteristic of the system makers is that they are non-men pleasers. I'll give you a good example again from myself. I'm a good example. When I was growing up, when I was little, especially if you belong to the religious echelon, you started to learn that you stopped doing things that informed your own ideals and facilities. You started doing things to please somebody. Now, there's one person that must always be pleased, that is God. But we are not here on earth to try to please men. That is a point anybody must get. If your entire preoccupation has been to please men, you have failed before you start. Men are unpredictable. The best of us are the worst at worst. I'll repeat that. The best of men are the worst at worst. Somebody that you have looked for or to last year who may disappoint you gravely next year. Because human beings, by definition, cannot be trusted. They must be respected, but they can't be trusted. We do our best to trust only God, not men. We do our best to trust God, but not men. And we do our best to please God, but not men. Because God has been constant, and I've proved it in my writings, in my research. There was a time when I was bombarded with the question, should I continue to follow God? Is he any different from a superhuman hero, a politician, a writer, a historic philosopher? Why should I follow him? And in my own research all my life, I found that one thing is constant with God. It never changes. Human beings do. That is why your central thesis and focus is to trust God but not men, to respect men but not trust them. That is the reason why don't bank on pleasing men. Bank on bringing your ideals to fruition. Make sure you have a goal, a dream, a vision that you can articulate. Now, I am emphasizing we need to respect men. We need to accord them the dignity they deserve. We need even to listen to their advice, but we are not supposed to always take their advice. We must always judge the advice with a pinch of salt. This is because human beings usually live for their own gratification. They might use God, they might use government, they might use academia, they might even use a good cause. But at the end of the sophistication of their call, human beings live for themselves. They want a legacy for themselves. They want ideals for themselves. So that is why we can't, in all due respect, please them all the time. If 20 people say what you are doing is wrong, there will be another equally 20 people that you say what you are doing is right. Try to experience. Don't be a man pleaser. Don't even work to please me. Once our organization starts on its feet, I want everyone in this organization to be independent in thought. Thinkers, critiques. You analyze things, you question things, you ask for ignorant questions. Why are we doing this? Why shouldn't we do this? Is this the right way to go? Is there another way? It is from that formation that we can create a human potential able to change the history of our ignominy into the future of our grandeurs. It is important that we think like that. The third aspect of the people that make into the Maker's Quadrant is that they have a single mind of purpose and vision. Now, it is important for us to know. When you look at the human expanse, the physicality of our physical makeup, our biology, we have what is known as 5 senses. We feel, we hear, we see, we smell. Well, all these 5 senses, and of course we taste, the last to go is always the sense of sight. You see, when a human being is in a coma, they can still hear, they can still taste, to some extent intravenously. They can still feel, sometimes without response. They can still sometimes smell, but they will be not considered dead until the sight has stopped. Now, some will close their eyes, but they see within the eyesight of their brains. When a person dies, just from the sense of sound or hearing will be the sense of seeing. Once their eyes change from seeing the natural into seeing the supernatural, they are dead. Literally, they have passed from life to death. They will be able now to see nothing of the earth and start to see only of the supernatural acclaim in which they are going to go. That is why vision is an integral part of a human being. In this organization, you have to have a vision. Don't situate yourself where you are and think that is going to be your long-term goal. Always think above your situation. See yourself before you be yourself. See what you can do before you do it. See what you can make before you make it. And this is a quadrant in which we have people who are visionaries, who are inventors, who bring us ideas that shape our entire locale and entire activities on earth. You can't belong to the system makers until you start to have strong visions, to see what others can't see. Sometimes to even go against the grain, to differ with everybody else because they see the mundane, the natural, the useless. They go nowhere. And you see direction. You see the goals that lead you to the destiny. You must have a vision. If in this organization you are going to be the accountant, you must see money beyond what we can and must make. If you're going to be a musician, see yourself on the platforms of the greatness. If you are going to be a director, see your organization expand beyond what historically has been done. Every single day I've been dealing with those who are in the management team. I've been showing them, they've been telling me, in Zambia, it is impossible to sell books. And I told them that's where our strength is. Because it has been impossible to sell books in Zambia, then it is possible for us to think of ideas that will make it possible to sell books. I'll tell you one thing. In enterprising, you don't become rich based on what everybody else knows. You become rich by selling a product people have less knowledge about. If you're going to follow the status quo to be like everybody else, you remain among the average because everybody subscribes to the same formulation. If you are going to make money or a name, do something everybody else is not doing. Most especially, do that something they consider impossible. Because once you grave above the impossible, they will follow you. They have already calculated themselves and consider themselves to be unequal to that kind of proposition. And therefore, they will rely on you. That's why you give them solutions. And in the exchange of the solution, they'll pay you money. They'll make you great. They'll fix you above everybody else. In our movement, we'll be selling books to a country that is known as to be poor in terms of readership. And we'll make everybody enjoy reading in Zambia. Well, we have another component of our vision is to making sure that we make Zambia green. Mr. Martin is doing it. Everybody of us will be doing it also through organization. The only difference is that what our movement will be doing is to lobby governments, international organizations, and foundations to make it law that Zambia subscribes to every climatic conditions and facets that are there, so that we can guard our country from destruction. We'll make sure that government passes laws that are environmentally conscious. We'll make sure that our people live in green environs and that our country does not waste things, but keep things for posterity. We will do the impossible because we have a vision. If we want to do things like everybody else, remember a few times ago I've given you tests without you guys knowing. I've given you, for instance, I've said, can we make this song become #1 on the charts? And some of you, understandably and granted, you have formulated the old ideas. That is impossible in Zambia. Others of you have gone against the grains and say it's possible. But I want all of you to be on the same page that nothing we do is going to be impossible. Even if the past, those who came before us have failed, we can't fail. Because we are going to belong to the makers who make things happen for Zambia. We will not wait for those who have been politicians before to guide us because they have failed. Our country is still one of the poorest in the world. We can't get ideas from them. You know, a wise man said, if you keep doing the same things that you have failed in, then you must consider yourself in the quadrants of foolishness. Because you produce the same results, and those will be failures. We are not going to follow those we have called Zambian politicians right now. They have just maintained things. We're going to see when we come to the maintenance. We are going to think differently. We'll bring a revolution in economic prosperity, in political transformation to the nation the world has never seen. I'm counting on every one of you listening to my voice that will not think like them. We will not be dissuaded by those who have tricked us, made us like fools. Well, some of you might ask, do I pay attention to our history? Yes, I do. Within our history lies our greatness. Some people have said we Africans from Africa have been devoid of development. Well, it is true. It is because in the past, they cheated us. They told us, acquire a foreign language, acquire a foreign accent, acquire foreign attributes, be like they are in the Americas, be like they are in Europe, then you'll be developed. In the 1980s, they even formulated what they call SAPs, structural adjustment programs, that were patterned upon the structuralization that had been done in Americas and in Europe. And they thought that if they implemented those on Africa, they would bear the same fruit. But actually what those structural adjustment programs did was to plunge us in Africa into quagmires of poverty situations no one has ever experienced in the world. We became destitutes, beggars in our own countries. We became the livestock of the world, devoid of the technological production. Our universities were callous. They couldn't even provide an iron. They couldn't even develop a toothpick. They were simply like glorified institutions in which people just passed and left. They have not innovated nothing. We used to have thinkers in the past like Chinoso. Nobody of you knows about him. In the 1960s, Chinoso confronted the probably 1980s, he confronted the United Nations that he was one of the first Zambian who wanted to reach the moon. And they laughed at him, refused him grants. And yet he had ideas that were imported and stolen by those who happened to have reached the moon. You see, it's because when you belong to the wrong quadrant, your ideas are either neglected or are stolen. Now, most of you that belong to the Bible echelon, you understand in Ecclesiastes that there's a situation depicted by Solomon. He says, a poor man had a dream. When he shared his dream, They laughed at him and they did not take him for seriousness. But the wise did take his plan and ideas and made them into something. That is what happens to those in the lowest quadrant. They can dream, but the dreams will be used against them or for the benefit of the highest quadrants. It is important, therefore, for us to know that in this quadrant, I want everyone who is listening to my voice to start thinking beyond where you are. You can generate resources. You can make connections. You can move from poverty to richness, from struggle to experience. You can become what you have always believed you are. Only you must desire to move from the shackles of maintenance and grinders into those that make things happen. And I've started this process for most of you, which in the very shortest period of time to come will show you that you are no longer who you used to be. I'm going to go now, because of time, to the second level or quadrant, the system maintainers. Who are these? The system maintainers are characterized by three characteristics. And these are a sense of rightness. And I'll tell you one thing. In every society, the majority of the people are in this quadrant. They have a moral philosophy that right must be right and wrong must be wrong, which is a very attractive ideology or thought pattern or philosophy. Because of this ideal that right must be right and good and wrong must be wrong, society is kept intact. It's not disintegrated. In societies where right is defined as wrong and wrong is defined as right, morals disintegrate. Society becomes unmanageable and ungovernable and eventually falters and falls apart. System maintainers are mostly of the view that right must be right and wrong must be wrong. This is why you still find families that are united, people still paying taxes to government, and people still living up to the contracts they've signed and making sure that they don't founder or violate their sacred statements that they have made to God and to men. It is important to belong to the system grinders because it maintains a sense of rightness for society. Otherwise, society will have to make itself and remake itself. You remember in the past, there used to be generations that passed through dark ages, others that passed through the Renaissance, others that passed through the modern industrial revolution, and us who are passing through the internet age, and those above and beyond us will be passing through the artificial intelligence age. In all these ages, it was a question of morality. Remember, what destroyed the Renaissance was the scholastics, the very people that people had trusted, the preachers, university professors, the church. They were trusted to the extent that they made them into gods. But the quandary or the difficulty they found was that their overt trust in these human institutions was not equal to the experience they saw these leaders do. They were immoral, they corrupted the system, they started using their power against the weak. In the end, people started to distrust the very scholastics, to distrust institutions of learning and the church. And people started to vie for something personal. And that led into the discovery of industries that made mass production a norm and not an exception. In our days, we have the blessing of history. And we know one thing, that to maintain a system, we must believe in right. We must also believe in wrong. However, we must not do this at the expense of infringing the rights of others. And this has been the most difficult aspect of African development, is that in Africa, we still hold so much the ancient rightness at the expense of the modern rightness. In the end, we still subscribe to what is 50, 70, 100 years old at the expense how the changes in our scope of thinking are happening. Remember, if you have to argue with history, you must also argue with Daniel. In the book of Daniel, Daniel prophesies that in the end days, people's thinking capacity will expand. They will not think the way they thought in the millennia past. People will think technologically. They will think artificially intelligently. They will think developmentally. They will fashion ideas. And the reason why that is important for us to take into consideration is the fact that resources are never the same. Although we know from the principles of conservation, matter conservation, that energy just transforms from one state to another. However, resources can deplete. If in Zambia we had 2,000 or 2 billion tons of gold, of copper, by 2023, we shouldn't have the same amount because we keep digging out and it doesn't replace itself. Copper does not reproduce. What the amount that has been put into the soil is the same amount forever. It will never change. It's not like plants that you plant one seed and it grows into 70,000 tons of the plant. No. Natural resources of the old nature, they are depleted. The more you use them, the more they change. But remember the wisdom of God is that He will put wisdom into human beings so that they can convert whatever they get out and keep it for eternity without depleting by the conservation of energy. And these scientists have already given us that law, the law of conservation of energy. So we can take copper, the same amount we had 100 years ago, and maintain it by creating things that preserve it. And that calls for technological and intelligent thinking capacity. We can't be thinking the same as we thought 60, 70 years ago and preserve our country. We have to change, to move from thinking that if you take an ion of zinc and you sell it the way it is in its old form, you are going to create 20 tons of it. That will not happen. It is only when you think that if we manipulate that or zinc or lead or copper into some other form and still make money out of it. Let me give you a good example. Water. Water can exist in 3 states of matter. It can be solid, liquid, and gas. A wise brain can keep making money out of water throughout the entire year. Can make it into solid and sell it as ice. Can make it into liquid and sell it as bottled water. Can make it into gaseous and sell it as a thing that helps in the hospital for people to resuscitate their lives. So if you don't think that way, you only believe in the inaugural water that you had, and when it evaporates, you say you've lost it, you remain poor for the rest of your life. So that's why the maintainers are essential, because they're in this quadrant in which they manipulate the forces of life into maintenance and even improvement of lives. The second aspect or characteristic of the maintainers is that they are obedient. They are compliant to the system. This is the reason why a government may pass a bad law and people will simply ignore and obey it. The system makers will refuse it, will even take the government to court and consider the law unconstitutional. But the maintainers who argue that government is right, they don't even question the dictates of government. They don't even know how to question government, so they simply obey. Now that quality, ladies and gentlemen, is essential in the sense that if the majority are compliant, you can always bring some sort of economic policy into implementation. Because if everybody's always shooting down your ideas, then you can't go anywhere. But we must be wary. We must not take the idea of maintenance into everything. That is why Africa became what it became. Because when the people from abroad came to Africa and gave us one idea, we bought into it without question. We had no thinkers. We had no critiques. We simply took what we looked like without analysis and accepted it. And look where we are today. We must not do that for the future. If anybody comes to Africa or to Zambia with an idea, we must have thinkers. We must have those who belong to the maximum of the idealists, that is, the makers, and scrutinize those ideas. If we find that they have got aspects that are liability to our future, we reject them. If we find that they have got aspects that are assets to our future, we receive them. A sense of compliance, nevertheless, is essential, because if a country or a system is not banking on the idea of compliance or doing things as others have suggested, then there will be no loyalty and there will be no sense of solidarity. So the system maintainers are important for that. The other component of the system maintainers is that they are task accomplishments. In other words, they accomplish tasks. You give them an assignment and they do it. Go to your job and evaluate your work. Who in your job does the most? Is it the executive branch, the administrative branch, or the down bottom ones? You'll be shocked that it's the down bottom ones. It's the general laborers. It's those without titles. They are the ones who bear the biggest bout of the job. The job of the executive is just to think. The job of the management is just to put ideas into some sort of formulas. But then they give instructions and orders to those at the bottom. And those at the bottoms are the ones who carry out the dictates of the great. We've done that in Africa. We have behaved like those at the bottom. That's why they call us third world countries. Because some countries are like managing management. Some countries are like in executive positions. We have been relegated to the grinders, to the lowest category, the general laborers. We simply receive things and implement them. Well, I shouldn't be ungrateful, but I should be reasonable. We are using technology right now. I'm able to speak to you in Zambia from Canada because some American or someone from the quadrant of the thinkers or the changers made the technology of, Google Meet possible or Zoom possible. But that's what sometimes we live for the rest of our lives. We wait for somebody from the thinkers as well as the makers to tell us that there's a technology, and then we buy into it, and then we perfect it. Then we become like we even invented it. We use it to perfection. But we'll never be as rich, as important, as famous as those people until in our Zambian laboratories we start to think of ideas like these and more, so that we can also sell them out to other countries as innovations. That's when we start to prosper our lands. These are not absurd ideas. They are not etched in stone. If somebody in America did them, in Africa we can do them. You get the point? If somebody in the Western world is able to formulate some technology, we can do the same in Africa. In fact, we must do the same in Africa. The coming generations must not wait for Western countries to lead. We in Africa must lead in technology, in leadership, in economics, in every facet of life. That's when we'll start to bank up to anybody in the world and change the quadrants. We in Africa will no longer be the grinders, will rise into the maintenance and then up into the makers. The time has come for our generation to start thinking higher than our ancestors. They were good. They preserved our continent, but they didn't think. We can't be like them in that category. We must think above them. We must innovate Africa. We must innovate Zambia. If Zambia is going to be a developed country, we can't have the same mentality as of the yesteryear in government, in management, in industries, in every facet of life, in the media, everywhere. We have to make sure that their mentality changes to innovation so that Zambia can start to play the role of a leader and not a follower. Let's go to the last category of the quadrants, and that is system grinders. By inference, I have already alluded to them. But this is the lowest category, whether you look at it at the national level, continental level, global level, family level, or otherwise. I'll give you one of the quotations that I did, and I quoted it from the Bible. Jesus said, "The poor you will always have with you." But he did not say, disregard the applied. Now, remember, I am quoting from a book that I hold very intimately dear in my life, the Bible. I have never disputed the authenticity of the Bible. I hold the Bible truthful to itself. Mostly the reason I hold it truthful is because of what Jesus said, which proved a lot of things in the Old that they matched. If I found any evidence that what Jesus said was not matching with what Moses wrote about, Joshua or other authors in the past, I would have disregarded just like another useless book. The reason why I believe in the Bible is because it has this minutia of intellectual as well as spiritual correctness to it. Jesus says, "The poor you always have with you." It's a dynamic and a revolutionary statement. In every epoch and era, you may not have rich people, but you always have the poor. It's incredible. But that does not mean that we should be comfortable to believe that our countries should remain poor. When it says the poor you have, it was in the context of a group synergy, not national synergy per se. You can extend the thought if you want, but it doesn't mean that Zambia must continue to be poor. It's not saying that. It's not a justification for misery. It's not a justification for poverty, for a continent, the entire continent like Africa, to be labeled a poor country, and yet it has got the most worthy resources of all that God had put in the soil. Do you know what is keeping America surviving nowadays? It's the minerals of Africa. They are using them for uranium, weapons of mass destruction, cell phones, anything. But we, the progenitors of the continent, still suffer from the label of poverty. We can't allow that, gentlemen and ladies, to evolve further than our generation. We must refuse, because we are the progenitors of resources. Prosperity belongs to Africans. It belongs to us. We live on the land that has been gratuitously blessed by God with everything. Look at our rivers, our valleys, our jungles. Look at our forests, our mountains, our valleys. Look at a continent that is connected to the world by 3 giant water bodies: the Atlantic, the Indian, even the Mediterranean. Look at the continent that shares other continents: Asia, Europe. Look at the continent that paves the way to other continents: the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa. Look at the continent that is shaped like a heart, the center of living. Look at us, where God has placed us. And for some reason, we must be considered the poorest, the most miserable, the beggars. That should not be. Africa is the most blessed in terms of location, in terms of weather patterns, in terms of climatic conditions, in terms of resources. Not even at a small country like Zambia, stretching from northwestern province to the Copper Belt to the eastern province. It's all a land laden with precious stones. We did well to call it Copper Belt, but we must extend that and call it Mineral Belt. It was the land that made Cecil Rhodes rich, which made South Africa rich, which made Europe rich. It's the land that still makes the world currently rich. We must not think otherwise. We've been situated by God strategically. It's time we began to manipulate the wealth of our God-given land and make Africa the respectable icon of the world in prosperity, in dignity, and in the life to come. We can't remain the grinders in this situation. Everybody has taken advantage of us. Even a baby in diapers in Western countries comes up of age and takes advantage of us. That must not be. This generation is called upon to change that dynamic. We can't just let a European or an American come to Africa and give us some useless talk and we buy into it. The highest corporation, I'll tell you an example. Walmart, I don't know if you still have Walmart or you have Walmart in Zambia. Walmart is a chain of stores in the Western countries. Do you know that that country is richer than the United States, richer than India, richer than China, richer than Europe? It's got what we call the GDP higher than nations. A country, which means the CEO of Walmart is more powerful than the chief of all the countries in the world put together, probably. The corporations have amassed so much wealth that they are even equal to nations. That's what's happening. That's why in corporate terms, we use things like, corporate advantages or corporate responsibilities. All these, we use them because life has changed. One company can come to Africa and be as rich as Zambia itself. But the entire country wavers in poverty. Our thought must start to change. Let me give you quickly and then we close. 3 characteristics of the grinders. First of all, they are yes men. They have a yes man mentality. They accept everything. They don't question anything. We can't be like that in our movement. We can't be like that in Africa. We can't be like that in Zambia. Yes men mentality has destroyed homes, destroyed nations, and destroyed continents. The easiest word to say on earth is the word yes. The most difficult word to say on earth is the word no. And that is because the people who say no, they think. The people who say yes, they don't think. You do not need to think so much to accept anything. But you need to think so much to reject something. So it is important that the future of our continent and our people must not be yes men. Must be thinkers. We must review things. We must ask deep questions. We must move up. We shouldn't fear to fail, that if we say no, then we are failed. No is not always associated to failure. There's a story in the Bible where Jesus gives a story of 2 brothers. The first brother is asked by the father, are you going to do something? And he says yes, but he didn't do it. The second brother is asked, are you going to do it? And he says no. But then he changes his mind, he does it. And Jesus asks a very philosophical question. Which of these 2 brothers did the will of his father? The affirmative answer is the second one, who said no at first. Do you know the reason why? It is not yes, yes that wins the day. Many times it's the no, no, no that wins the day. In this organization, I don't want you to be just mind bloggers. I want you to think, analyze things, do communicate your ideas. Well, I have a publication company here in Canada. If you want to publicize your ideas, I will make sure that your book comes into the world, into the light. Don't be afraid. And we'll start changing things. The second component of the grinders is that they are risk evasive. That means they only think of risk as a deterrent. In other words, anytime they ask a question, it is 60% likely that I'll fail. They don't do it. They always want to see it's 90% that I'll succeed, then they do it. Look at me, if you can, the eyes of the lens of this recording. You do not need to answer yes or to have affirmative 51% for you to do an activity. In law, there are certain times when judges have refused to give a certain remedy, and years passed, and you find that that remedy now is accepted. There was a time when, in the world, a judge wouldn't divorce a couple if they just had fought twice in their marriage, or if there was no adultery in their marriage. Take it to now. Nowadays, a judge can give a divorce to just on irreconcilable differences. The law is changing. There was a time when it was impossible to do one or two things, but now it's easy to do the same things. Rights are changing. That is why you have to be risk takers to change a nation, to change your life, to change others. Remember, if you do nothing, you have by default failed. But if you try to do something and you fail, you only failed 50% really, because the other percentage, you learned how not to do it next time. Isn't that the question they asked the inventor of the electric bulb? Why he tried 1,000 times and only succeeded once? His answer was, the 99 times I failed were the ways I discovered it did not work. The 1% I tried and it was accepted was because of the 99 failure times. So take risks. In this organization, we are going to take risks. We are going to think big. We are going to dream big. We are going to do big. Nobody is going to put us down. Nobody. Anyone who has been born of a woman cannot put us down. That only leaves one person in the world who can put us down, who was not born of a man, Jesus. Every other person who is born of a man and a woman, guys, cannot put us down. No, nothing. We have to take risks. The grinders are in the position they are because they fail to act. They give their ideas to the maintainers. They give their ideas even to the system makers, but they don't take those ideas by themselves. In Zambia, in Africa, we must learn to take risks and do things, even if they don't please the West, even if they don't please the United Nations, even if they don't please the African Union, even if they don't please government, for God's sake. We do them because when we succeed, the same people we thought are going to be aversive to them will come to support us and to benefit from us. If Isaac Newton and others had made all those experiments and then gave up, people are going to laugh at them. You tried, you failed. They wouldn't be in any historic book. But they are in our historic book because they never gave up. They made sure that they tried to put their ideas into practice. And the last characteristic of the grinders is that they are commoners. Now, most of you, those of you who are listening to me from the United Kingdom or from other kingdoms, don't take me wrong, because in those kingdoms, they are the elites and the commoners. In Canada, we have got even something called the House of Commons, which was a derivative from the historic UK governmental kind of legal structure in which they had the lords and the commoners. The lords belonged to those who were closer to the royalty, to the king or the queen. And the rest of the people were considered to be commoners. In other words, they were common. They were usual. They had nothing. Society cannot be structured like that anymore. I don't care whether you live in the United Kingdom or you live in the Lesotho Kingdom. People are never commoners. But this is how society regards others as commoners. They are not commoners. Anyone who was made by the will of God, created in the image of God, is not a commoner. We are all royalties. The Bible calls them a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a government of the sanctified. And we must honor those kind of regiments. We shouldn't be thinking of ourselves as commoners. I'm just a nobody. I belong nowhere. I have not a name. You do. You are important. The grinders, they are commoners. And when you are called a commoner, you exhibit 3 characteristics, which I'll end with. The first one is that you fear change. Commoners fear change. They will live how they are, who they are, until they die. Don't be a commoner. Don't fear to change. Don't fear to displease people. Do you know how many people have displeased in my walk to where I am, to teaching you what I'm teaching you? Several. Some of them gave me several titles, names that are disgusting. They called me a backslider, a hater of God, a loose mouth, whatever. They have called me all kinds of names. But you see, life is very interesting. Most of them have come now to honor me. They call me sir. They call me respectable names. Because if I remained the way they are, I would have been thinking exactly like them, doing things exactly like them, and achieving nothing like them, and going nowhere like them. I decided to be real, to move from the commoners into the uncommoners. And commonness makes history. I'll repeat that. And commonness makes history. If you want to go on the street dressed in your chitenge material and wearing your tropicals and carrying a bag of maize on your head, they will not put you in the newspaper. But try to remove all your clothes and walk on the street naked, and on your head carrying the flag of Zambia. Very soon, all the Nkanis, the Zambia Daily Mail, they will put you in the newspaper. You make a name immediately. Because when you were common, you were invisible. When you're uncommon, you become visible. I'm not saying you go on the street wearing nude. What I'm saying is that go on the street with a new idea nobody thought about. You will become uncommon. Everybody else want to write about you. Mr. Martin is one of us. One day he decided to go rogue, to start collecting garbage all over Zambia. And people say, this is unheard of, it's uncommon. And they brought him all over the media. Now Mr. Martin is common and working his way to changing the Zambia environmental status. If he remained common, fearing to do that because it was going to make him look different, you would have not been here today. If I had decided 20 years ago, not to start researching on the problems of Zambia and come up with Zambia's struggles of my people, I would have been just like all these ordinary authors. They write a small book about something small. They don't even think through it. They publish it. It goes in the archives and it fails. But we are here talking about struggles of my people because I decided to be uncommon, to devote 20 years of my life researching on one country. So guys, in this organization, I am calling upon you to be uncommon. Africa, I'm calling upon you to be uncommon. Zambia, I'm calling you upon to be uncommon. Because if you're uncommon, you will not have the fear of change. Secondly, you won't have the order paranoia. In other words, you only want to do things the way others have always done them. That is an element of structuralization that fails. Do you know why we are still indebted in Zambia? Because every government processes debt the same way. This generation of the people I'm talking to will not do that and will not be indebted to anybody else except if we do it by purpose so that we can transact trade business. The last aspect of those who are common is that they are conservative fixated. They don't want to move a step into the newness. That's why they are known as conservatives. In governments where people want to maintain the status quo, they are known as conservatives. You need to have aspects of progressiveness for you to change a system. It is important to be able to conserve certain traditions, especially the tradition that respects women, respects children, respects parents, respects nature, respects the environment. Those we can be conservative to death. However, issues of poverty, advancement, technology, we can't remain conservative. We must think progressively. I want to see those you in education to try new things. Those of you in the media to try new things. Those of you in sciences to try new things. Don't always expect the West to lead. Let Africa, let Zambia lead. This is the end of my chat on the 3 quadrants into our journey towards true influence under the ambit of the system. Thank you.